Imagine it's June 6th, 1984. You're in Moscow. You're not a game designer, you're a computer scientist at the Soviet Academy of Sciences, and you've been staring at the same program for hours. The machine in front of you is an Electronica 60. No color, no sound, just green text characters arranged into falling blocks on a dark screen. Blocks that stack and lock and then vanish. You keep telling yourself you'll stop. You don't. You have just written one of the most important games in human history. You also don't own a single ruble of it. The Soviet state does. His name is Alexei Pachinov. The game is Tetris, and for the next 12 years, he won't see a dime. We're talking about all this and more on This Week in Video Game History. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and this week we are covering June 1st through June 7th. June has never been the busiest month on the release calendar. Historically, it's more about the announcements than the launches. But this particular week has some generally remarkable games buried across 4 decades. This week gave us the Mario sequel Nintendo thought America couldn't handle, the first Zelda game to prove a handheld could carry a full adventure, a Japanese RPG about a kid named Ness that Nintendo marketed with scratch and sniff stickers and somehow still undersold it. The moment GTA San Andreas broke free from PlayStation, the life simulation that redefined what a summer PC launch could be, an open-world superhero sequel with a lot to prove, and Capcom completely reinventing the fighting game, plus the Cold War origin story of Tetris, Nintendo's most baffling marketing campaign, and the moment Microsoft pointed a camera at your living room and called it the future. So grab your controller and press start to continue. Nintendo built this game for people who had mastered the original Super Mario Bros. And wanted to suffer more. That's not an exaggeration, that is the design brief. On June 3rd, 1986, Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan. Not on a cartridge, but on the Famicom Disk System. If you don't know what the FDS is, it was a floppy disk attachment for the Famicom that launched in Japan earlier that year, and offered more storage than cartridges and never came to the West. It lasted until 1990 and gave us some genuinely important games, including this one. The game was a direct sequel to Super Mario Bros., built on the same engine, but with wind, poison mushrooms, backward warp zones, and level design that punishes every assumption the first game taught you. Nintendo of America played it, called it too difficult and too similar to the original, and decided American players weren't ready for it. Instead, they took a completely unrelated Famicom game called Doki Doki Panic, swapped the characters for Mario characters, and released that as Super Mario Bros. 2 in the West. Western audiences didn't get the real sequel until Super Mario All-Stars on the SNES in 1993, 7 years later. Rebranded as the Lost Levels. The name says everything. Here's a fun trivia fact for you. This game started as an unauthorized side project. A group of Nintendo developers began porting A Link to the Past to the Game Boy in their off hours. No formal approval, no dedicated team. When management found out, instead of shutting it down, they gave it a director and a green light. That director was Takashi Tezuka. The result, released in Japan on June 6, 1993, was Link's Awakening, the first Zelda game ever made for a handheld, and the first set entirely outside of Hyrule. Everything about it broke the rules of what a Game Boy game was supposed to be. It had a deep narrative, a full overworld, multiple dungeons, and a story that actually stuck with you at the end. Tezuka said he wanted the island of Kolanat to feel like Twin Peaks. Strange, layered, and with something wrong underneath the surface. If you've played it, you know exactly what he meant. It sold 3.83 million copies and boosted the Game Boy hardware sales by 13% in 1993 alone. An enhanced color version, Link's Awakening DX, came to the Game Boy Color in 1998. A full 3D remake hit the Switch in 2019. The original holds up. A quick note on the date for this one. Most primary sources, including Game FAQs and Wikipedia, put the North American release at June 5th, 1995. A couple of sources say June 1st. Either way, it lands in the window. I just want to be upfront with you. EarthBound is the American release of Mother 2, a game designed and written by Shigesato Itoi, not a game developer, but one of Japan's most famous advertising copywriters. The game launched in Japan in August 1994 to strong sales. Nintendo of America spent months localizing it, changed hundreds of cultural references, renamed characters, rewrote dialogue, and boxed it with a full strategy guide instead of a manual because the box was already oversized. They also ran a marketing campaign that is one of the most fascinatingly wrong decisions in gaming history. But that's the deep dive, and we'll get there. EarthBound sold poorly in North America. Critics didn't know what to make of it. The quirky humor, the modern suburban setting, the deeply strange enemy designs, none of it fit the template. For years, it was a cult game in the truest sense of the word. A small community that loved it intensely, while most people had never heard of it. Then NES showed up in Super Smash Bros. In 1999, and the questions started. The digital re-releases arrived. Then the internet caught up with what this game actually was. It's never left since. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas launched on PlayStation 2 in October 2004. It had been an exclusive to Sony's platform for 8 months. 8 months during which it sold over 10 million copies and became one of the most talked about games ever made. On June 7th, 2005, it finally came to Xbox and PC in North America. And it brought something with it that nobody was expecting. The PC port shipped with hidden code, a fully modeled explicit minigame that Rockstar had cut from the final game, but hadn't removed it from the files. A modder named Patrick W. found it and released a patch called Hot Coffee that unlocked it. The ESRB temporarily reclassified San Andreas adults only. Congressional hearings followed. Hillary Clinton introduced legislation. Rockstar issued a fully patched version. The game's original PC release became a collector's item. The actual game underneath it all? Enormous. 3 cities, a sprawling countryside, gang storylines, flight school, driving school, a weight system, over 100 radio stations worth of music. Set in a fictionalized early 90s California and Nevada, it had been a masterpiece before the controversy. The controversy just made it one of the most culturally significant releases in the medium's history. EA originally planned to release The Sims 3 in February 2009. They delayed it deliberately, 4 months, specifically to own the summer. The VP of Marketing said, and I'm quoting the actual press release here, that they wanted to be the, quote, the original IP summer blockbuster of 2009, end quote. That is some remarkable confidence. And it worked. The Sims 3 launched on June 2nd, 2009 and sold 1.4 million copies in its first week. The best-selling PC game launch of the year. By 2015, it had moved over 7 million units. The biggest change from Sims 2 was the open neighborhood. Previous Sims games loaded each lot separately. Your sim existed in a bubble. Sims 3 dropped you into a fully continuous town. Your sim could walk out the front door and go to the park, the library, the gym, all without a loading screen. It sounds like a small thing, It changed how the whole game felt. The expansion pack ecosystem that followed was extraordinary. 11 full expansions, 9 stuff packs, and a lot of players never left. Sims 3 still has an active modding community. For a game from 2009, that's not nothing. The first Infamous launched in 2009 to generally enthusiastic reviews and surprised a lot of people. It was a superhero open world that took its moral choices seriously and gave you real reasons to play both the good and evil paths, and made electrical powers feel kinetic in a way that hadn't been done before. The sequel had pressure on it. Infamous 2 launched June 7, 2011, developed by Sucker Punch and published by Sony. Cole McGrath is back, but Numerius, a fictionalized New Orleans, replaces Empire City. The stakes are higher. A massive entity called the Beast is coming, and Cole doesn't have enough power to stop it. The whole game is a race to get stronger before that happens. Sucker Punch added a user-generated content mission creator. Players could build and share their own missions, and a karma system that pushed even harder towards 2 radically different endings than the first game offered. The good and evil paths don't just feel different morally. They end completely differently, with different powers, different story beats, and generally different emotional payoffs. It scored an 80 on Metacritic, a solid entry, but not a landmark. But it closed out Sucker Punch's PS3 era with confidence, and laid the groundwork for Infamous' second son on PS4 3 years later. Street Fighter V launched in February 2016 with almost no single-player content, no arcade mode, a broken online system at launch, a roster that felt thin. Capcom had staked one of the gaming's most iconic franchises on a live service model, and the opening weeks were rough. It recovered over time, years of updates, DLC, a growing competitive scene, but the launch damage lingered. Street Fighter VI launched June 2nd, 2023, and it was a statement. World Tour is a full open-world RPG where you create a custom fighter and travel the globe learning from Street Fighter's roster. Battle Hub is a virtual arcade lobby where you can walk your avatar across the floor and challenge other players at cabinets. The drive system replaced the V-Gauge with a more versatile resource that opened up entirely new gameplay possibilities. 18 characters at launch, a 92 at Metacritic. Won the Game Awards 2023 Best Fighting Game. And here's a June 2nd footnote worth mentioning. Tekken 7 launched on June 2nd, 2017. Diablo Immortal launched on June 2nd, 2022. Street Fighter VI launched on June 2nd, 2023. 3 major competitive releases the same date. Nobody planned that. It just happened. June 2nd, apparently, is where big competitive games go to be born. We met Alexei Pajitnov in the teaser. Let's go a little bit further. When Pajitnov finished Tetris on June 6, 1984, he did what Soviet researchers did. He shared it eternally. Copies spread through the Academy of Sciences network, then to other institutions, then out of the country through a chain of middlemen until a British software company called Mirasoft had it, and a Hungarian entrepreneur named Robert Stein thought he owned the rights. He didn't. Nobody outside the Soviet Union did. The rights belonged to ELORG, the Soviet State Agency for Software Exports. And ELORG had never actually signed anything. By 1989, everyone wanted Tetris. Atari wanted it. Nintendo wanted it. When Henk Rogers, a Dutch game developer based in Japan, heard that Nintendo was planning to bundle a game with the Game Boy, he flew to Moscow. January 1989, the Cold War is still technically running. He walked into ELORG's offices with no appointment and negotiated the handheld rights for Nintendo directly from the Soviet government. The Game Boy launched with Tetris. It sold 35 million units. The rest is history. Pajitnov saw none of this for 12 years, until 1996 when the rights finally reverted to him, and he and Rogers co-founded the Tetris company together. You heard the timeline entry. EarthBound came to North America on June 5th, 1995. Nintendo has a genuine masterpiece on their hands, so how do they sell it? Scratch and sniff cards. The campaign was called This Game Stinks. Nintendo ran full-page spreads in gaming magazines with scratch and sniff panels, pizza, a garbage can, a monkey, a dirty foot. The tagline was, "Scratch here, smell this." Now think about how much this game smells than these smells. That's a real sentence Nintendo's marketing department wrote and printed in magazines. The idea was counterculture irreverence. Lean into the game's weird humor. Stand out from conventional RPG marketing. The problem was it told players absolutely nothing about what EarthBound actually was. It looked like a joke. It spelled like one too, apparently. The game sold roughly 140,000 copies in North America. In Japan, it had sold 2 million. The gap between these two numbers are one of the most discussed mismatches in gaming history, and it's almost entirely a marketing story. EarthBound deserves a full episode. The Itoi origin story, the Iwata connection, Satoru Iwata debugged the game in a weekend as a personal favor, which is its own remarkable footnote, the fan campaign that finally brought it back digitally, and what it means that a game this beloved barely existed in America for nearly 2 decades. June 1st, 2009. Microsoft's E3 press conference. The Xbox 360 is doing well. Halo Reach gets announced. Metal Gear Solid goes multi-platform. Standard E3 fare. Then they bring out a camera. They called it Project Natal. No controller, no buttons, just a sensor bar that tracked your full body. Skeleton mapping, 48 points, facial recognition, voice commands. A Microsoft exec stood on stage and kicked a virtual ball. A virtual boy named Milo, created by Peter Molyneux at Lionhead Studios, appeared to recognize faces, respond to emotions, and accept a piece of paper handed to the camera. The room lost its mind. The context. Nintendo had spent 3 years proving that motion controls could reach audiences gaming had never touched before. The Wii was everywhere. Microsoft had watched the Wii sell 50 million units to people who didn't own game consoles and decided they wanted those people too. Sony was doing the same thing with what would become the PlayStation Move, announced at the same E3. Project Natal became the Kinect. It launched in November 2010, sold 8 million units in 60 days, a Guinness World Record, and then slowly became one of the gaming's most debated hardware stories. And Milo? It never shipped. I remember watching the launch of this device. Guys, Miss Tink can attest to this. I cried. Wept openly because I looked at this as an evolution. I have been playing games since I was a kid. I cut my teeth on the Atari 2600. I've been here through all the great origin stories, used so many different controllers and devices, and here I was seeing an evolution of gaming where there was no controller, only myself. It was absolutely beautiful. And I might be one of the few people that used the Kinect for a very long time. First off, I loved 1 versus 100. And I was so proud to get on that board a few times. I bombed it each time, but I was still proud. And for a while there, every night, we were having video calls with friends. It truly felt to me that we were one step closer to living the Jetsons life. The full story of what the Kinect promised, what it delivered, and what it cost Microsoft, that's an episode all on its own. Imagine it's June 6th, 1984. Alexei Pachinov is staring at a screen full of falling brackets in a Moscow research facility, and he has no idea what he's just done. He doesn't know that his game will lead the Soviet Union in a briefcase, that corporations on 3 continents will fight over it in courtrooms, that a Dutch businessman will fly to Moscow in the middle of the Cold War and walk out with the rights, that it will ship with a little gray handheld and sell 35 million of them, that 40 years later, it will still be the thing people reach for when they need something to do on an airplane or a waiting room or a sleepless night. He just knows the blocks feel right when they fall. That's the thing about this week. Super Mario Bros. 2 was too hard for America until it wasn't. EarthBound smelled like garbage in a magazine ad and became one of the most beloved games ever made. Street Fighter VI had something to prove after a rough previous entry and answered every question. The games that last don't always arrive the way you expect them to. Sometimes they start as bracket characters on a green screen. Sometimes they ship with scratch and sniff cards. Sometimes they just quietly fall into place. That's it for this episode. Thank you all very much for sticking around. If you like this episode, please make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube or find this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Artwork for the show was done by Ms. Tink. Music produced by Shane Mendini. Make sure you follow him on Twitch and also on Spotify to listen to all his great music. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me, Doug Coleman. Be sure to save your game, nerds. I'll see you next week.